Only install or replace hydraulic parts if you've had proper training. Keep the following in mind. Use only clean hoses, couplings, and crimping devices, and ensure cleanliness so the fluid does not get contaminated. Only use hoses, couplings, and crimping devices that were meant to be used together. Never mix and match parts made by different manufacturers or parts that are not the same size. And, finally, use hoses, couplings, and crimping devices that are appropriate for the type of fluid the hydraulic line will contain, the pressure that the fluid will be under, and the temperature of that fluid. Account for spikes that may temporarily raise the pressure level. Hydrogen sulfide is a toxic gas which is encountered in a wide variety of industries. While it is not the #1 industrial danger, there were approximately a dozen deaths per year in the period 1992 to 2002 which were attributed to the gas. This module describes the dangers of hydrogen sulfide and how those risks can be reduced. The following is a sample hazard scenario for a machine press operator and the hazard of cutting a hand. Where? The hazard occurs in the machine press room in front of the machine. What? The sharp edge of the metal sheet can harm the operator. How? By cutting the hand of the machine operator. This is a result of the sharp edge of the metal sheet. But another contributing factor is that the operator sometimes works quickly and doesn't look closely at what he's doing. Consequences? The operator can receive a significant cut as a result, and perhaps even get an infection. Ladders are tools commonly used to gain access to higher levels that are otherwise unreachable. When maintained properly and used according to safety guidelines, they are a simple and effective tool. However, each year thousands of workers are either injured or killed in ladder-related accidents. As a result, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, has established safety guidelines for working with ladders in an attempt to prevent ladder-related accidents. Lasers have become an integral part of society. Due to their ability to carry large amounts of data with little or no signal degradation over long distances, they are commonly used in fiber optic communication systems. Medical lasers have been developed that allow doctors to make tiny and precise incisions in surgical procedures. Grocery stores use lasers to scan barcode patterns on products and read the price. In measurement equipment, lasers are used to measure both large and small objects, from tiny organisms in the lab to distances along a street. The practical applications of lasers are almost unlimited. Lead is a naturally occurring element that is a dull silver-bluish color. It is dense, malleable, resists corrosion, and has a low melting point. Lead is sometimes found free in nature, but usually combines with other elements to form lead compounds. Due to the high density of lead, it is used as a shield from radiation such as X-rays and nuclear reactors. Its resistance to corrosion makes lead a good candidate for lining containers and tanks that hold corrosive materials such as acid. This training will cover a brief history of lead usage and will also describe the potential dangers and preventative measures for dealing with lead-containing materials. Only trained and competent personnel should direct and conduct the removal and disposal of lead-based paint. Depending on how much lead is present, the waste may be legally considered hazardous waste. Always follow local and federal guidelines during disposal. The double block and bleed is a common method of isolation. It involves closing two valves that are upstream from the location of the planned line break, and then bleeding out the material between these valves. If the first closed valve malfunctions or leaks, the second closed valve will still protect workers from the material in the line. There are also standalone double block and bleed devices that incorporate the necessary 2 levels of blocking protection in one device. Industrial equipment and machinery is typically large and complex. When this equipment is shut down to be serviced, maintained, or repaired, there are typically multiple people from different trades involved. It is imperative to everyone involved that the equipment be stopped and remain still while the work is being performed. Lockout-tagout refers to specific practices and procedures to safeguard all workers from the unexpected startup of machinery and equipment or the release of hazardous energy during service or maintenance activities. This module will define the need for these procedures and the general form they take. The details of implementation may vary from site to site, but there are general federal guidelines which must be followed. The National Fire Protection Association, known as the NFPA, created the 70E standard. NFPA 70E is the Standard for Electrical Safety in the Workplace. It establishes safe practices for working with or near electrical equipment. Before NFPA 70E, the National Electrical Code created standards for installing electrical equipment, but did not discuss working with that equipment. The U.S. Occupational Safety and Health Administration, known as OSHA, does not have its own standards on electrical safety. It relies mainly on the NFPA to set industry safety standards. NFPA 70E is updated every 3 years because the types of equipment and known best practices can change over time. This module will provide an introduction to NFPA 70E and will summarize some of its important safety guidelines. OJT mentors have the best chance to succeed when they are part of an OJT team. This team typically includes 3 different roles: trainee, mentor, and supervisor. The trainee is the less experienced worker who is being trained. The mentor is the more experienced worker who provides the training. Mentors are also known as coaches or trainers. The supervisor selects the trainees and mentors and pairs them for training. The supervisor may also help the mentor prepare for the training. Cranes are used in factories, warehouses, and shipyards to provide lifting and movement of heavy objects within the area covered by the crane's area of operation. 3 primary types of cranes are used in industrial settings: bridge cranes, gantry cranes, and jib cranes. Bridge cranes are mounted on parallel rails attached to elevated wall structures. The bridge is a beam that runs between the 2 rails. A trolley with a hoist mechanism travels back and forth on the bridge. Gantry cranes have a bridge supported by 2 legs that move along floor-mounted rails or on wheels. As with the bridge crane, a trolley runs back and forth on the bridge. Jib cranes have a jib or a boom that is mounted to a wall or a mast. The jib crane swings in an arc around its pivot, and the trolley runs from end to end on the jib. As in normal life, the greatest challenge to pedestrian safety in the commercial workplace is to avoid collision with mobile equipment. There are several factors in the commercial environment which increase the risk to pedestrians. In a warehouse or manufacturing workplace, people and mobile equipment work in close proximity to one another, where the roadways and walkways are not always clearly defined, or even separate. Mobile equipment, especially forklifts, are highly maneuverable and can suddenly be where a pedestrian might not expect them to be. The operators of mobile equipment have concerns such as impeded vision, load carrying, and restricted maneuvering space that a typical automobile driver does not have to deal with. Two parties must be at fault to cause a collision and injury. The most important factor in avoiding pedestrian injury is education of both the pedestrian and mobile equipment operator. Once trained, both pedestrian and driver must remember and practice the concepts discussed here. Equipment design and safe work practices are not always enough to ensure a completely safe environment. Personal protective equipment, or PPE, is used to further protect employees from work-related hazards. Employers are required to supply employees with the necessary PPE appropriate for their work environment. Because personal protective equipment is so critical to worker safety, the American National Standards Institute, or ANSI, has developed strict guidelines, ratings, and standards for safety equipment performance. Employers must ensure that all PPE, either used by or provided to employees, offers adequate protection against the hazards in the workplace. It is a wise practice to ensure that PPE meets or exceeds established ANSI standards. As an employee, it is your responsibility to use the necessary PPE and practice safe work habits. In order to provide the most benefit, PPE must fit properly. It should be comfortable and allow for freedom of movement. Always inspect your PPE for defects or damage and never use defective or damaged equipment. Personal protective equipment should be carefully selected, depending on the environment in which you will be working. The remainder of this training will cover the various types of PPE, any limitations that you can expect, and the standards published by OSHA for each. This module will focus primarily on issues surrounding relatively small sources of high-energy radiation which are used in sensor applications in industrial settings. If radiation is not properly controlled, it can be hazardous to the health of workers. Radiation may be defined as energy traveling through space and can be classified into two broad categories: ionizing and non-ionizing. Ionization is the process in which a charged portion of a molecule, usually an electron, is given enough energy to break away from the atom. This process changes the atomic structure of the molecule and results in the formation of two charged particles called ions. The term radiation is commonly associated with radioactivity, which refers to a substance which gives off ionizing radiation. When chemical exposure occurs, 1. Immediately move to an eyewash station. 2. Use either the paddles, levers, or pull lever to turn on the eyewash. 3. Hold your eyes open with your hands to ensure water reaches the eyes. 4. Flush the eyes for 15 to 60 minutes, depending on the corrosive qualities of the chemical. Be sure to keep the eyes open and rotate the eyeballs in all directions. And 5. Once flushing is complete, turn off the eyewash. Follow these guidelines for eyewash use. Never hesitate to use an eyewash if needed. Have a coworker contact emergency medical assistance immediately. If there is no one to ask, rinse for the allotted time recommended in the SDS and then seek medical assistance. If irritation persists, repeat the flushing procedure. Do not use lab or drench hoses as an eyewash. These hoses are typically used for cleaning and may not be sanitary. Never rely on sink faucets to replace an eyewash. Some outdoor eyewashes may run discolored water for a few seconds. Never hesitate to use them immediately when needed. Do not use the shower for any other purpose that might inhibit the immediate use for an emergency. And beware of slippery floors during and after use.
Although the two main types of sexual harassment are quid pro quo and hostile work environment, there is a third type that combines the two: sexual favoritism. Sexual favoritism occurs when a supervisor rewards employees who participate in sexual activities, but does not reward those who do not, even if those employees were not asked in the first place. This type of harassment blends the issues of submitting to sexual demands in order to receive job benefits with working in a hostile work environment. Sexual favoritism is not always recognized within the court system. In order to qualify as sexual harassment, most courts believe the favoritism must be both widespread and extensive.
If you fall, there are several things you can do to maintain control and to help minimize or avoid injuries. Tuck your chin down to your chest and cover your head and neck with your hands. Try to land on large parts of your body, especially your sides or buttocks. Try to avoid landing on your head, back, or small body parts like your elbow. And don't try to break your fall by extending your hands and arms and locking your elbows. This frequently leads to broken bones. The EPA uses the term Best Management Practices, or BMPs, to describe the preventative source control measures that are implemented to prevent stormwater contamination. These BMPs are referred to as either structural BMPs or operational BMPs.